What's the difference between organic and regenerative farming? As a conscious consumer, you want to make the best choice. The term organic has been around for decades, but it's starting to be overshadowed by the new buzz term regenerative. Let's talk about the differences that you need to know so you can make the best choice for what you actually want. When making a conscious food choice, organic and regenerative are a step ahead of conventional. But you want to know which is better between these two. There are differences, but you will likely find that today's content will illustrate that those differences are not as substantial as you might initially perceive. But before we get into this, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Arland Hill. I'm a regenerative rancher that helps individuals reconnect to the hidden benefits of animal-based foods to improve their health in weeks, not months. I want to begin with a quick disclaimer. Today's content between regenerative and organic is going to address both plant and animal production. But I raise animals, so if the topics that we go through today seem that they're slightly skewed towards animal production, well, that's what I know firsthand, and so there may inherently be a little bit of a bias there, but the information also applies to plant production as well. I want to begin by giving some context to regenerative and organic, and giving you a simple way to think about these when you're looking at those terms either on labels or elsewhere. Regenerative is looking at how to work with the cycles of nature. Inherently, you're trying to rebuild or build resiliency into the system. This often starts to trend into topics like soil health and soil building, just because that's such a crucial element to whether we're talking about animals or plants. The soil has to be healthy and productive and be a constant supply of nutrients for both the plants and the animals to be productive. But it doesn't just end at soil health. It also looks at water and air quality, animal quality, how the animals interact among species. So, for example, how species interrelate. So, for example, maybe chickens and cattle and maybe ducks or sheep, how these different species all work together. But it also looks at how animals interact with humans and how that relationship plays out. Maybe what we often think about as animal welfare. That's in general how when we talk about regenerative topics or regenerative approaches, that's the mindset that's going into the final product. We're building more resiliency into the system. And just in case that doesn't immediately resonate with you, let's step out into pasture for a minute, and let me show you a real world or example of what regenerative ranching can look like. One example of regenerative ranching could look like the cattle herd getting ready to move to the grass where the meat birds have been, and then ultimately continuing on to where the laying ducks and chickens are. And what you'll notice is that as I look at the grass, see how that grass is a darker green? It's going to be more nutrient rich, and that's a byproduct of those chickens, and now the cows benefit from that. And so these are all examples of regenerative farming in motion. Well, that's how regenerative ranching looks, integrating those cycles of nature in with the systems. What about organic? Well, another way to think about organic at its most basic level is synthetic free. So you can think about synthetics as man-made, often translating to things that you're not looking to consume as a conscious consumer, being aware of what you're consuming. And I'll start us off with giving a more definitive definition here by the EPA. And note that as I give this definition, this is a definition of exclusion. And it notes that organically grown food is food grown and processed using no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. Now, I want to be clear on this, that's the EPA definition, the Environmental Protection Agency. But the USDA is the organization that oversees organic standards. And I think it's also very important here to lean on their definitions around this. And they go much further. They're emphasizing the practices used in organic. They're not just thinking about the absence of chemicals, but all I'm trying to do as we compare organic and regenerative is give you a simplistic way of thinking about these things. Regenerative is looking at the cycles and trying to build resiliency into the food production systems and make those overall better systems. Organic is synthetic free. It's chemical free. You're avoiding the things that you don't want there. It's an easy way to think about those differences, but understand that there is overlap between organic and regenerative. So let's talk about something else here. Who tends to use these terms that we see now, organic and regenerative? And I think this will also help give you some clarity on this. When you look at the term organic, and I want to start here because it's a much more commonly seen term, and it has been for a long time now. Organic is generally associated with larger scale operations or producers in the marketplace. And a lot of the reason that that's the case is because the fees that are associated with becoming organic are very expensive. I actually looked into this more recently, within the last 2 to 3 months, and just made the decision again that this is not something I want to do. I want to be transparent to our customers, have farm tours, show them how we do things, and just let them understand what we're doing. But for as a small producer, for the investment, it doesn't make sense for us to do that. Now, many of you are familiar when I say these large organizations or producers, like let's just say you're in the grocery store, you're looking at picking up a bag of carrots, just as an off the hand example, and you're looking to see whether it's organic. You should look to see, does it have that USDA organic label on there? And those are easily recognizable, so you know immediately when you're getting something that's organic. But again, think about the context in which you're often getting that. What about regenerative? Regenerative, even though it is starting to gain traction in a larger scale, it is still predominantly small scale. And maybe a much better way of saying that is that it's still a local producer concept at this point, even though, again, it is starting to be integrated in larger scale operations here and there. But you'll see more regenerative labels start to flow into the marketplace as a byproduct of that. But that is going to happen as that term increases in popularity. That's what's ultimately going to drive that into the marketplace. But you as the consumer, right, you're being conscientious about what you're consuming. You want to have a conversation with that local producer. And again, that local producer is often going to forgo a certification. And that includes on the regenerative side as well. We run 100% regenerative practices here on my ranch. We operate with organic standards as well. We could just as easily meet the standards for either one of these, but the outlay of capital, the price to do that, to be able to have that label and to be able to use that terminology definitively, just isn't worth it for us. And frankly, you know, a lot of times when you look into these, how to meet the criteria as a producer, how does a farm meet these criteria? Well, they have to go through audits to meet these criteria. They have to go through third-party verification on this. Well, frankly, I think personally that myself and others, because we are so passionate about making sure that we're raising these animals correctly or raising our plants and foods in a proper way, that we're probably self-critiquing and self-analyzing at a level maybe even more significant than what a third party might do. Now, in looking at these labels, let me transition back to that just for a minute. You're very familiar with that USDA organic. You can walk into almost any retail food store and find products that are going to have that. But that's not the case for the regenerative labels. And there are different regenerative organizations that are out there. I would suggest if you're going to look for one, based on my research, the one that appears to be above everyone else right now is one known as A Greener World. They have a certified regenerative label. You can see that here. It does seem to be able to meet criteria that the other organizations that are trying to promote regenerative practices don't hold the same level of standards. There is another one that is noted as regenerative organic certified. Even if you go to the USDA website, you'll see that this is often, even from some of their indirect publications, it's stated as USDA certified organic plus. Don't read into that. Don't let that confuse you. That is not an official recognition at this time. The USDA acknowledges regenerative practices, but they don't apply that same terminology the way that they apply organic. So you're not going to see a validated regenerative label by the USDA at this point. So what should you look for on a label? Well, at retail outlets, you should be looking for that USDA organic, and if you can get the regenerative on there, all the better. But if you're buying local, which is definitely what I would encourage, to keep the local food system and your relationship with your producer, so you can have that relationship, you can ask those questions when you have them. Should they have those labels? Should you look for those labels on their food? No. You should go out and have that conversation with them. Now, because you are a mindful consumer and you're thinking about the food choices that you're making, I realize you also may have questions like, what's the difference between hormone-free versus conventional chicken? The difference is shocking, to be honest with you. So click on the video on the screen to find out why.